What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the Opinionated Hippie, and this is part 5 of me breaking down, ranking, and reviewing the guitar solos from Frank Zappa's Halloween '77. I want to call it a box set, but this is what the box looks like. All the shows are on this little drive right here. Yeah, just plug it in and make your own CDs out of it. So interesting. But yeah, we're on show number 5 of this run, October 30th, 1977. Again, there's only 7 solos, but there is one different solo that was not in the previous 4 shows, and then one show solo from the previous 4 shows that sadly is not in this show. No Conehead in this show, which with Wild Love is one of the contenders for best song of this run as far as guitar solos go for me. With Conehead not being represented here and Wild Love being represented, that might tip the scales a little. But what we get instead of a Conehead, not really instead of, but we get a Stinkfoot. Frank decides to mix it up 5 shows in and opens the show with a Stinkfoot, which I'm assuming he did only so he could film the Poodle lecture, so we could put that thing in Baby Snakes, the movie, which, also, the Muffin Man solo, the entirety of the Muffin Man solo is from this show, the Baby Snakes version of that, which is a fantastic solo. So anyways, yeah, I'm going to talk about these 7 to 1. And then, yeah, I'll rank this show among the other 5 I've already listened to. And that means we got one more show, Halloween. Number 7 this time is Leather. Great little solo. I think this is maybe Frank's most, least committed of them. He's doing a lot of that little tiptoeing type, where he's almost like muting the strings as he plays them to give it that little tiptoe type energy. He does that for almost the entirety of this solo. And I think some of the other Leather solos in here have a little maybe of a jazzier fluidity to them, or even get a little emotional bluesy for 4 bars. It's only a minute long, the solo. But this one seems like he's still in a Torture Never Stops in the beginning of that, or even the beginning of Wild Love, where he's setting something up for a longer solo. But because this is only a minute long, the setup, there is no real payoff. Still interesting, but I think the least successful of the ones for this show. Number 6 is Stinkfoot. I love Stinkfoot opening solos. I think this one is fantastic also. I think it very much, there's an expectation about Stinkfoot solos that they're not going to go anywhere. They're not going to peak. They're not going to build up into this volcanic, peak, climax, eruption. I think his solos in 74, the fall 74 tour, which he would just play and be like, okay, that's enough of that. We're going on the next song. Very much sets up an expectation for a Stinkfoot solo. It's the opening solo. Frank's just going to warm up. He's going to play for a minute or two. When he's done, he's done. Doesn't matter if we've reached any sort of natural climax. The solo's just going to end. And that's what this is. It's 2 minutes of Frank just messing around, plays some awesome licks, gets kind of bluesy for a while. He's definitely into it. There's momentum, there's energy early on. It's not like he's looking for ideas. But then the solo just ends. And then we, unfortunately, go into a Poodle lecture. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good solo. It's a good opening thing. I think it gives Frank both a chance to warm up early in a show while at the same time delivering something that's pretty interesting. So number 6 would be Stinkfoot. Number 5 is City of Tiny Lights. Comes in with this really neat sort of melodic idea that he doesn't really commit to, but he's got this little lick that feels like it's maybe referencing another song. But then after that, he just starts shredding, and it's your typical City of Tiny Lights, just full on attack, high adrenaline. It's got that, sort of death vamp going on. At the end, there's a really neat interaction with Bozio and FC, where FC's just doing these low notes, and Bozio's trying to almost mimic them on the drums. And then O'Hearn comes in with this awesome little bass run. And the interplay between the 3 of them, the Bozio, O'Hearn, Frank thing is fantastic. But this is, for the most part, a pretty straightforward, aggressive, gritty, metallic, kind of dirty, kind of nasty City of Tiny Lights solo. What you're hoping you get, nothing more than that. Number 4, Muffin Man. Fantastic solo. There is a moment in this solo that, having seen the video, in the video, about a 30, 45 seconds into the solo, Frank starts giving high fives to members of the audience. And then while he's giving high fives, he's still playing with his left hand, just like bending notes and like, like playing these like, almost like these series of couplets that he's playing while he's high-fiving people. Like he's keeping the momentum going with his left hand, while his right hand's, acknowledging the crowd. And knowing that moment when it comes and hearing it, it just, I don't know, makes it such a more powerful moment. And it just, after that, after Frank's done giving the high fives, the solo just kind of takes off to another level. And I mean, it's just, it was for the cameras, Frank knew he was filming this for the movie. He's bringing it all. He's leaving it all on the floor, leaving it on the stage. A lot of adrenaline, a lot of energy. There are moments where it almost seems like he's responding to Baloo in the background, who's just playing these awesome sort of this. And in the next solo on here, it just seems like he's aware of what's going on with like Baloo's sort of rhythm in the back, what he's doing with his lines, and he's kind of leaning into that. He's interacting with Terry and O'Hearn in a really good way. Yeah, excellent solo. Probably the one most people are familiar with Muffin Man, because this is the thing everybody reacts to on YouTube. It's an absolutely fantastic solo. But it's only 4 on this because there's more fantastic solos. Number 3 is Punky's Whips. I think this is by far the best Punky's Whips of the run so far. Another one where Baloo's doing that that guitar riff that's in the background of Punky's, and Frank is like almost like responding to that and mimicking that and kind of taking inspiration from that for some of his licks. The interaction between the 3 of them, O'Hearn and Bozio and Hammer, are fantastic. There's a lot of moments where he's just like, this is all just pure momentum. And every time it seems like we reach a point of like, we're going to end the solo, Frank all of a sudden just repeats, like, will repeat it like 5 or 6 times. So like, sort of like he's going to like a cartoon animal who's about to take off in a race and his feet are doing this before he takes off. Frank is kind of repeating that over and over in this solo, where he's like, I'm just going to do this for a little while and then take off. I'm going to do this for a little while and take off. And it just has this like, this momentum where there are so many natural points in this solo where you think Frank could call it quits, and he just does it. He kept going and going and going. Just fantastic. Easily, I think, the best Punkies yet, which is why it's number 3. Most of the Punkies so far in this run have been towards the back of the list, not because they're bad, but just because they're doing what a typical Punky's Whips does at the end of a set, just kind of leaves it all out, like high energy, get the crowd worked up before the encores. This one's bringing a little bit more of that, a little more intensity, a little more like just pure Frank shredding at its best. That's number 3. Number 2, The Torture Never Stops. So one of the things about these tortures, and I've talked about it in every video, is it's usually 2 halves. You got this first half, which is like a little more experimental, has this lighter, airier thing. Frank's playing around with chords. He's kind of almost like making air sculptures. He's like, doing like these kind of gentler things before he usually will like step into his effects or hit a pedal and things get a little nastier and grittier. And then O'Hearn and Bozier sort of step up the energy. This one, and he started this in the last one, the 10:29 second show. This one has a continuity, sort of a continuum about it, where you don't ever feel there's any given moment where Frank has all of a sudden just turned up the knob. It's like we start off airy, light, kind of exploratory, kind of gentle and tiptoey, a lot of like air sculptures for the first 2 minutes. And then O'Hearn specifically steps up. Oh no, this is Wild Love I'm thinking of. But then he starts to just get a little more aggressive around the 2-minute mark. And all of a sudden he's just kind of digging in a little more and like bending notes a little bit more. But it's not like really, really getting more aggressive. And then once he gets a little more aggressive, then he hits a pedal and he starts playing with effects. And every time he adds a pedal or adds an effect, it just seems like we get a little more aggressive. We're getting a little more intense. But at no point is it just like, it's an obvious change in direction or a change in intensity, which I think is one of the things I don't really like about the first 3 solos in this run. I like the solos, but they seem like a tale of 2 halves. This one seems like this continuum of like continually to just turn up the heat just a little, enough where if you're paying close attention, you notice that we got a little more intense, But if you're not paying attention, then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, how did we get here? Why is he all of a sudden like shredding with this like metallic sound? Kind of reminds me of Jerry with in like the MIDI era of Jerry, when like a playing in the band, when he's just going from MIDI sound to MIDI sound to MIDI sound, and he's like experimenting. That's kind of like what Frank is doing with his effects. But every time he goes to a new effect, Bozio and O'Hearn responds by just upping the intensity. O'Hearn with his runs that he's doing, and so it has this very natural build that you almost don't realize is happening. Unfortunately, when we slide back into the song proper, it's a little bit of a tepid kind of, okay, the solo just ended, now we're going back into the song proper. So there's not a climax to the solo, but the journey is really, really interesting and really a good ride, and almost good enough to be number one, but it's not. It's number two. Wild Love is again number one. This is the Squirm version of Wild Love. Bowling on Sharon, Karen, whatever that is from one of these. This one is, again, like the previous one, not really committed to the Squirm energy very much, just very tepidly tiptoeing around it. Some not really heavily committing as he is early in this run. And this is the one where Frank is just kind of tiptoeing around for a minute or so, a minute and a half, just kind of playing with this Squirm energy, light, not really too aggressive, not really going anywhere. When all of a sudden O'Hearn starts playing this doo-doo on the bass, just this repeated like two note, like doo-doo, just like throbbing kind of heartbeat, doo-doo, that keeps repeating. And Frank kind of takes inspiration from that, and then will kind of, every time O'Hearn returns to it, a little more energy goes into the solo, but it still goes pretty chill for a while. Then about the 5-minute mark, after 5 minutes of what is pretty restrained playing from Frank, especially as far as the squirms going in other versions of this, all of a sudden O'Hearn starts getting a lot busier, and all of a sudden he's like like doing this little longer run, and the intensity ups even more at that point. And it becomes like this almost like propulsive, moving it forward, and Frank has to acknowledge what the rest of the band is doing. There's a couple moments where I think Frank's flirting with a little Inca Rhodes energy, like a na na na, but he doesn't really commit to it, but it just seems like the idea is there, or there's a couple notes there, and he just pulls back and doesn't go into it. But it does feel like we're reaching this. It doesn't have this crazy building yo mama energy. It definitely has this more like calmer Inca Rhodes energy. And Frank never goes into that. And then as the song goes on, and O'Hearn's kind of propelling us, things get a little crazier towards the end. But never really chaotic, never really too eruptive. The whole thing just stays almost kind of, I don't know, neatly not too crazy, like a Drowning Witch solo from '82, in which, or like a Zoot Allure solo from the '80s, in which everything's pretty like calm and gentle, and crazy things are happening, but we don't really reach this peak like a Torture would reach, or other songs. I don't know. It's not the best Wild Love of the run, but it is still really compelling, really interesting. Frank's really taking his time, and he's patient, and just the interplay and sort of the decisions that O'Hearn makes, particularly in this, that really move the solo forward, I think are just, I don't know, makes for a really compelling listen. But yeah, that's what they look like. That's how I would rank these. For this show, Wild Love is, with the absence of Conehead on this one, Wild Love's sort of taken the lead on best solo of the run, but we got one more Conehead to go, and I think maybe so far my favorite solo of this run is a Conehead solo, so we'll see how all this plays out. But of the shows so far, where would I rank them? I have this as the second show, mainly because that Punky's Whips, that Muffin Man, and the Torture Never Stop really, I think, might be the best three versions of those. The Wild Love's not the best Wild Love, so that drops it off one. There's no Conehead, so that drops it off one. But I think the other solos, particularly the Torture, the Muffin, and the Punkies, kind of lift this up I would say the second spot at this point. Though they're all pretty close. The only one that I think is definitely a clear one, I think the first show's the weakest. Not bad, but I think it's the weakest. But yeah, that's how I would rank them. Yeah, still the best show being that 10:28 second show. Conehead mainly. That Conehead is ridiculous. All right, that's all I got. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts on these solos, all that kind of stuff. Subscribe, like, share, comment, and go listen to Frank. Go listen to Frank. Go listen to Frank. He's a great guitar player. That's all I got. Peace. Talk to you later.